See what comes out. Hi, folks. Welcome. We're just waiting a few more minutes as people hop on. On my clock, it's just now 10 o'clock. So welcome and please mute yourself. I'm very lucky to have friends and family who support the type of work that I do. Yeah. All right, I'm going to give it one more minute.
Yes.
Seems like we're getting a rush of people, so we're going to give it another minute or two. Please mute. Yeah, thank you. Welcome, everyone. People are still joining. Welcome, Elizabeth. I see you joining. All right, I think that I will kick us off. So welcome, everyone, to the Partnership Convening. Most of you know this, but just in case, the partnership is a public-private collaboration between both the Department of Health and Human Services, Bureau of Drug and Alcohol Services, the New Hampshire Commission on Alcohol and Other Drugs, the New Hampshire Charitable Foundation, and the Center for Excellence on Addiction at JSI. The partnership really envisions a New Hampshire where individuals have the information and skills they need to make and support positive, healthy decisions around the use of alcohol, tobacco, and other drugs. And we're so grateful you're here today because we think together we can help individuals, families, and communities of New Hampshire get informed and get help when they need it. Today's agenda, we'll be doing a few brief partnership updates, and then we have two guest speakers, Dr. Jessica Steier and Christina Curell, who I will introduce right before their presentation. And we wanted to highlight that the New Hampshire Prevention Conference will be on May 12th, and you can register. They're accepting exhibitors and sponsors, and I believe we'll be putting the link to register in the chat. We wanted to highlight a youth vaping prevention resource that we have. We have some new content available. We have some e-learning modules and a video. There's some learning opportunities on youth vaping about effective communication and positive discipline. And all of these tools were designed to equip you with the knowledge, skills, and confidence to address youth vaping. And again, that resource will be put in the chat. So as I just mentioned, the May Prevention Conference is on the 12th, and that was when our convening was. So we are rescheduling to June 6th. All right, let me kick us off. 1 second. So I'd love to introduce Dr. Jessica Steier, who is a public health scientist, researcher, and host of the popular podcast Unbiased Science. She's going to talk with us and highlight some common tactics used to distort health information and share strategies to become a more critical consumer of health content. Dr. Steier is the co-founder and CEO of Vital Statistics Consulting, specializing in public health policy, research, advanced analytics, and scientific communication. She has led large-scale research projects on COVID-19 and health literacy, using evidence-based decision-making, and she's a strong advocate for translating complex data into actionable insights for the public. This session will equip you with the tools to navigate health misinformation, and communicate with clarity and impact. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Jessica Steier, and we will have time for questions. So,
All, all right. Can I go ahead and share my screen?
absolutely.
Okay. Let me figure out how to do this real quick and then we'll get right into it. All right. Okay. Let's hope I'm doing this the right way. Can you see my screen?
Yes,
Yes, I can.
Okay, let me close this so I can. I'm just minimizing things. Hello, everyone. I apologize. Okie dokie. Well, thank you so much for having me today. I've really, jumped in head first into the world of science communication, and I just wanted to share a little bit about my experience, what I find resonates with my audience, and as you'll see in just one moment, you'll see that I take a very serious approach to science communication. I'll get into that in just one sec. Let me see if there's a nice way for me to just go down. No, there is not. Okay, I'm just gonna slide down. All right, so here's evidence of how serious I am. So, all right, things I did not have on my 2025 bingo card. Needing to explain that scientists have been asking and attempting to seek answers to questions about chronic and infectious disease for centuries, and that we've made great progress. That vaccines are an incredible public health tool, and that measles parties probably aren't a great idea. Is there, let me just see if there's an easier way for me to scroll here. I'll just go like this. Okay. So, yes, as was mentioned, we do have a podcast, but we're also known for our social media graphics. So I'll get into the Unbiased Science platform in a moment, but I wanted to jump in and share with you some of the recent infographics that we've deployed on our page, just to give you a sense of our approach, our voice, our style. So that this first one on the left, we're a little tongue in cheek here, talking about the thousands of scientists around the world who have been asking questions about cancer, chronic disease, autism, etc. for over a century, would like a word with those who think this is a groundbreaking concept. Because as you may or may not have seen or heard circulating on social media, there's this idea that we haven't done enough. We haven't been asking the right questions. We haven't been investigating the drivers of these things, when of course we have. There's also a very troubling trend, a claim circulating that measles is actually beneficial for us, that there are notable long-term health benefits, including that measles infection is protective against cancer. And then finally, obviously, given everything going on, and that unfortunately we just saw a second death in this country due to measles, really reiterating some basic concepts about the importance of vaccination and reminding people that when vaccine rates drop, history will repeat itself. Right. Just one thing, I am hearing something. I'm not sure if folks can mute. Just one note about that. All right. So just taking a step back for a second. So what is unbiased science? Who the heck am I? As was just shared, my background, I'm a public health scientist. My training is actually in evaluation science. So I evaluate health programs, health policies, interventions. And then early in 2020, obviously we all know what was happening early in 2020. People had a lot of questions. It was rapid fire science by headline. The pandemic struck. We were all sort of unified in this, crippling fear. What's going on? And so I found myself answering a lot of questions, friends and family members. So I'm like, you know what? Let me just launch Unbiased Science as a way for me and other colleagues to address these questions. And I honestly thought that it would only be my mother and her friends tuning in, but Unbiased Science has really grown into something. We have about 600,000 followers across social media platforms, with an average 18 to 20 million views per month of our content. And I say this to really underscore that there is a real desire, need, and demand for science communication. And as I'll talk about in a moment, I'm not formally trained in this. So I've really learned by doing. And so my goal with this talk is really just to share some of what I've learned. And the last thing I'll say is that a hallmark of Unbiased Science is that we really strive to be empathetic, understanding in our communication, and as apolitical as possible. And we do also recognize that people consume information in a lot of different ways. So as you just saw, we'll deploy social media infographics, most of which are quite playful and have a strong design element. I'll talk more about that in a sec. We also have a podcast, we deploy videos, and we also have a long form content in the in newsletter format. So as I just said, I have been learning by doing, right? So like most scientists, I never received any formal training in communication. So I really threw myself into this world, and I've learned a lot over the last, 5+ years doing this. And there's some real pros and cons to deploying information on social media that I'll share that I'll share in this presentation. So unfortunately, I can't see a show of hands, but I like to ask this question. By a show of hands, who here has been personally victimized by a wellness influencer spreading misinformation about health and science on social media? And typically when I ask this question, a lot of folks raise their hands. So I thought I would jump in with a case study. So, not sure if folks saw this, but early last year, there was this viral post. I don't know if folks are familiar with the Food Babe, but she is quite popular. She has millions of followers, and she is a self-proclaimed wellness influencer. So she put out this viral post. She did a side-by-side of the US version of Fruit Loops with the Canadian version of Fruit Loops. And the whole post was about food dyes being harmful, and how food dyes are are banned in other countries, how they're linked to cancer. Within 48 hours of her sharing this post, it got over 2 million shares. Since then, that's climbed to over 100 million shares. It's also been picked up by a lot of celebrities. And so I like to say, so in the distance, sirens, right? This caused a ton of panic. And we saw this really formalize. So jump forward to October of 2024. There was a huge protest. Protesters were gathering outside of Kellogg's headquarters. They were demanding the removal of artificial food dyes. And I thought that this really illustrates the power of information and misinformation on social media, how it goes viral and it actually translates to action. And we'll get into that more in just a sec. So what did we do? So our response to this was to develop a playful but informative social media response. So I won't go through each of these specific slides. I'm happy to follow up with links if that's of interest. But we really wanted to educate people. What does the science actually say? What does the research actually say? And the key takeaway is that, well, yes, there are some studies showing that food dyes can lead to cancer. These studies have been done we found these things, in preclinical studies in rats who were exposed to orders of magnitude higher levels of food dyes than we as humans are ever actually exposed to, right? So it was a real teachable moment explaining the difference between preclinical and clinical or even real world research. And we thought, this really illustrated a central challenge, bridging the gap between public perception of a topic and scientific reality. And of course, it can be quite difficult to communicate a lot of the nuance of research, especially to folks who don't really have a background in science. So I don't know if everyone is familiar with something called Brandolini's law, but it's the concept that the amount of energy needed to refute misinformation is an order of magnitude bigger than that needed to produce it. So it probably took Food Babe, I don't know, 5 minutes to put out her post, and it took us weeks, months to try to address the misinformation and the fear mongering in her post. And here I just put in another couple of examples of how we address this via social media. We fixed her graphic showing that both the US version and the Canadian version of Fruit Loops are both safe and tightly regulated in terms of their ingredients. Now, this is really important. This is something that I've come to learn that simply, putting out canned statements, and I'll revert back to vaccines. We always say vaccines are safe and effective. Vaccines are safe and effective. We've heard that a million times, right? And I could say the same about food dyes. Food dyes are safe and effective. They're safe and effective. We tune it out after a while. It has no real meaning, right? And so we can't just dismiss people's concerns. We have to listen to what they're actually concerned about. We have to identify the information gaps, listen to questions, and build the bridge to science. And often that means really lifting the curtain on things, right? And not just giving those canned responses like, oh, this is safe and effective. Let's get into why we're saying that. What have the studies actually assessed? What have they actually found? We have to give people the benefit of the doubt, is what I'm getting at. And I love to say that in general, public health and science really need better PR. And so we try to, like I've been saying, take a little bit more of a playful approach, right? To connect with people on a different level, not just a didactic approach to science and health education. Because if people only wanted to learn science, they would read a science textbook, right? Social media, there's this entertainment value sort of built into how we put out information. And so we as scientists, as public health officials, we need to really lean into creative communication strategies whenever possible. Of course, this all matters quite a bit because there is a real impact of misinformation. And I'm going to share some statistics in just a moment, but we see this translate to consumer trust and behaviors. There's an economic impact, certainly a regulatory trust crisis, and undoubtedly a public health impact. So here are some statistics I thought were quite powerful. 73% of consumers report changing purchasing decisions due to viral food safety posts. 48% of consumers have stopped buying certain products due specifically to things that they've read on social media. 62% of consumers trust influencer claims over regulatory agencies. So people will trust a food babe over the FDA or over the CDC. We've seen this translate to things like company stock impacts, right? So after viral misinformation, we saw something like 15 to 20% drops for food dye manufacturers. We see billions of dollars in annual impact on the food industry from misinformation. And here, just really leaning into the impact on regulatory trust, 64% of consumers trust social media influencers, whereas only 41% trust FDA and other regulatory bodies. Only 38% of people express trust in scientific institutions. That, I don't know, I thought that was quite powerful. Now here, and these stats are pretty specific to food information, but I thought that this was really powerful and also concerning. 70% of low-income consumers say that they would buy more fruits and vegetables if organic options were less expensive or if there was less stigma around conventionally grown produce. And I bring this up because there's so much misinformation out there about organic versus conventionally grown. While no, we don't want to take a bath in pesticides, pesticides do serve a purpose. Without pesticides, our food supply would be decimated. And I think people often forget that organic foods are actually also grown using pesticides. They're just grown using organic pesticides, which tend to actually be less effective than conventional pesticides, and therefore we have to use more of them. 1 in 5 consumers report avoiding fresh produce altogether due to concerns over pesticides, as many say they cannot afford organic. Now, there's this massive information ecosystem, right? So we're not just fighting misinformation, we're competing in an attention economy. So we have traditional media, there are social media platforms, which is where I sort of live in Unbiased Science. We have wellness influencers like the Food Babe, and many others. Bobby, Flav City comes to mind, countless others. And then, of course, we have people on the front lines, community health workers, clinicians, the scientific community, and regulatory bodies. This came out recently. I thought this was interesting that 52% of Americans who've tried a health trend, tool, or approach in the past year said that they found them on social media. And over half of Americans learned about health tactics that they've tried in the past year, right? So this is just going to illustrate the power of social media and that increasingly Americans are getting their health information from social media. And this is really a double-edged sword, as illustrated using the Food Babe example. Misinformation can certainly be propagated, but it also presents a real opportunity to use it to put out good, credible information. All right, let's just take a moment to look at the anatomy of viral misinformation. This is actually another, I feel like I'm really picking on her here, but this is another Food Babe post where she's vilifying, she often vilifies processed food versus real food. In this post, she's comparing mango fruit bars to organic mango chunks. And I just want to set the stage here by saying I am not saying that everyone should, go out and have 100 mango fruit bars every day, or that mango fruit bar is a replacement for fresh fruit or anything like that, right? But what she's doing here is she's oversimplifying and she's spreading fear. So what are some of the elements that make content go viral? So certainly emotional triggers, especially fear. Misinformation posts tend to elicit a very strong emotional response. Simple, absolute statements that are overly simplified, appeal to parental instincts. This is a huge one. An appeal to desire for control. So having people think that, oh, if I consume this, it's really going to improve my health, or if I avoid this, I'm going to add X number of years to my life, right? This very black and white, all or none thinking. Cross-platform amplification. I'm going to talk about this in a moment, but what goes viral on one platform will go viral on other platforms, just in different formats. And this secret truth narrative, right? Like this, these really brave whistleblowers coming forward and exposing some deep state secrets and behind the scenes secrets. That's a very common tactic. I'm not going to spend too much time on this post, but I just really wanted to chat about the gap between scientific reality and public perception, right? And right now, what's filling the gap are these information sources. So friends and family members who are sharing things that they've heard, social media influencers, health and wellness bloggers, and less and less traditional media, certainly seeing much less trust in government agencies, scientific institutions, and then large corporations and companies. Thought that this was also quite powerful. This was published in the 2024 Edelman Trust Barometer. So people were asked to rank their, who they trusted to give them truthful information about new informations and new innovations and technology in health and science. And as you can see here, people ranked scientists at the same level as someone like me. So peers are on par with scientists when it comes to trust in, who we trust for information in health and science. So that was quite powerful. Now, what are some of the gaps in science literacy? So, in doing this for the past 5 years or so, definitely some key themes emerge. So, there's a lack of fundamental science knowledge. So, just one example I'd like to give, and I'll talk about this in a second, but this misconception of sugar composition of common sweeteners and this appeal to nature fallacy, right? So that like maple syrup or honey is healthier than high fructose corn syrup, for example. And so this vulnerability to logical fallacies, I'm constantly highlighting this appeal to nature fallacy. We're seeing more and more of this, anti anything that's synthetic or produced in a lab, and this, real lifting up of anything natural or organic. Certainly, we're seeing an overconfidence in scientific knowledge. So there's something called the Dunning-Kruger effect. I'm sure most of you are familiar with. But unfortunately, the less knowledge people have, that seems to coincide with actually overconfidence in their assertions. And for me as a data scientist, I see a lot of lack of understanding of just basic research design concepts and implications for validity and reliability of findings. So, for example, the importance of research design and why research is more generalizable than an individual anecdote, right? And why we design studies and the use of control groups as a proxy for the counterfactual, for example. So how does this translate for me in terms of how I deploy information to my audience? So here I'm just giving you a couple of examples. Here I touch on the left-hand side what I was just talking about, sugar composition of common sweeteners. So this idea that honey is healthier or safer than high fructose corn syrup or table sugar or cane sugar. But when you actually look at the chemical composition, they're actually quite similar in terms of their breakdown of fructose and glucose. Then there's also this idea, of course, as I just touched on, natural versus artificial and the appeal to nature fallacy and the health halo. Here I just give the example of butter flavor, right? How natural and artificial flavor chemicals are actually the exact same molecules, chemically speaking. Now, here's something that I was talking about when I was giving the example of food dyes, the safety of food dyes. So just some basic understanding of in vitro and in vivo studies, right? And how preclinical trials and in vitro studies, they're very, very powerful, but and they're very important. They serve a very specific purpose, but they cannot be generalized to what happens in a whole organism or in a human, right? So helping people understand the differences between different types of research. Here on the right-hand side, I was very proud of this particular post. I use the example of ice cream causing shark attacks to illustrate the difference between correlation and causation, right? Because we know that more people are likely to buy ice cream in the summertime, which is also when we're more likely to see an increase in shark attacks because more people are swimming in the water. But of course, we could not say that ice cream is causing shark attacks. So sometimes using playful examples to illustrate some actually complex fundamental scientific concepts. Another thing I talk a lot about is the risk perception gap, how the public tends to focus on things that really, in the grand scheme of things, don't have that big of an impact on our health. So things like specific ingredients or additives or vaccine side effects, individual chemicals, organic versus conventional, all that good stuff. And we're not talking enough or worrying enough about the things that we know actually have a huge impact on our health. So overall diet patterns, sedentary lifestyle, preventative health, sleep quality, climate change, and limiting alcohol and tobacco use. Now, another thing is that people feel their experiences, of course, very deeply. But anecdotes, of course, they're data points. They're not evidence in and of themselves. But we do have to be very careful to not make people feel like we're delegitimizing their personal lived experience, right? What they're experiencing did matter very much, but here's why that can't be generalized to other people. So I like to give the example of I had a friend who said, "Oh yeah, I started the keto diet and it revolutionized my life. I lost all this weight and blah 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 blah." And I stopped and I asked him, like, "Well, did you happen to make any other changes?" And lo and behold, he did, right? And so just to illustrate that anecdotes are prone to bias. And the whole beauty of scientific research design is that we can control for other variables and factors and confounders. This is something that comes up quite a bit, this comparison to other countries. I'm not going to spend too much time on this. This does tend to be pretty food specific. But I like to illustrate to people that here in the US, we take a risk-based approach versus other countries, the UK and in Europe, tend to take a hazard-based approach. So here in the US, we're taking into account the likelihood of exposure, the likelihood of causing harm. So I like to give the example of a shark. I tend to use a lot of shark analogies for some reason. A shark is certainly a hazard, but you're not at risk for a shark attack unless you're in the water, right? And so here in the US, we do take into account likelihood of causing harm. And so we do take a different approach than other countries, but I would not say that other countries take a better approach. It's just a different approach. Another powerful tactic is helping call attention to things like cognitive dissonance, right? So you eat organic because conventional foods are covered with toxic pesticides and you only want clean ingredients, but then you'll go ahead and consume dietary supplements like green powders and protein shakes and creatine and detox teas, which, spoiler alert, are manufactured in labs and actually are quote unquote, processed foods, right? Another thing that is powerful is not just telling people about things, right, but actually helping arm them with information to spot misinformation. So this slide on the right came from a much larger post, helping people find the red flags of misinformation. So a fear check, right? You want to watch for panic driving words like toxic or deadly, or this false sense of urgency, or those very absolutist always never claims, right? So I try to tell people, stop and ask yourself, why does this post want me scared? There was a really, really fantastic piece that came out in NPR in September of 2024. And it talked all about to combat misinformation, you start with connection, not correction, right? People don't want to be lectured to, they don't want to be spoken down to. And actually, presenting people with facts is not nearly as powerful as first forming a connection with them, right? So you don't want to start from a place of judgment. You want to first find common ground before you launch into some, very didactic correction of some misinformation. So first connect as humans. So again, just in the interest of time, I'm not going to go into this in great detail. But here I just map out, what people believe, why they believe it, and what the reality is. So there are certain common misconceptions driving public concern, but you need to really understand the basis for why people are believing what they believe. And then only when you first understand what it is, why they believe what they believe, only then can you start to address their concerns. And you really want to build trust through understanding. So you listen first, you understand their perspective, connect as humans, communicate evaluate, okay, so is what I'm saying, is this effective? And then you could always adapt your communication strategy. Building bridges is without a doubt one of the most powerful things that you can do as a health and science communicator. You always want to acknowledge a person's concerns, share personal experience when you're able and willing to do so, use relatable analogies, and stay humble and stay human. And I'm going to give some examples in just a moment. Another thing I have found is that people really appreciate context and real world application. So last year, I think it was around February. I don't know if you all saw this, but there was a viral post. It was picked up in social media, but basically saying, go ahead and throw out your Cheerios or your oatmeal because the Environmental Working Group they put out this study that showed that there's this harmful substance called chlormequat, which is a plant growth regulator that is poisoning us, right? And so what we did and what we found was quite effective was we actually showed real world application, right? So let's count our Cheerios. How many Cheerios would a person need to consume to hit that risk threshold, right? That was mentioned in this EWG study. So it was something like over 1,600 Cheerios would need to be consumed, and over 200 canisters of oatmeal would need to be consumed. This sort of quantification really helped drive things home. It wasn't abstract. It was this real world context that drove home just how low the risk actually was. We've done this with lots of things. We did this recently in a post about formaldehyde in vaccines. And so we talked about how actually there's 60 times more formaldehyde by weight in a pear than in any vaccine. Also, don't know if you saw the viral posts about Girl Scout cookies. There was a Moms Across America paper or report that came out basically warning about glyphosate and Girl Scout cookies. It was terrible. We saw a dip in sales for Girl Scout cookies. But then when we actually went in and quantified just how many Girl Scout cookies would a person need to consume to reach a potentially harmful dose of glyphosate, we did all the calculations, we consulted with a toxicologist, and it was something like 9,000 cookies. So again, these concrete examples, these real world examples really help drive home health and science information. Another thing, so I'm sure you're all aware of the H5N1 situation out there. This also ties into the consumption of raw milk because we know that raw milk can spread the virus, and so there's a real campaign right now trying to underscore the importance of pasteurization, and so something that we hear quite a bit. Is that, well, people drank raw milk back in the day, right? So that has to be safe. Just sort of using that as an argument for why raw milk is okay to consume. And so we like to tell people, well, nostalgia is not a public health strategy. So sure, people consumed raw milk, but let's take a look at how many people were getting sickened, hospitalized, and dying from foodborne illnesses as a result of raw milk and raw dairy consumption. I also wanted to point out here that sometimes we can get a little playful. We sometimes lean into wordplay. So here on the bottom left, we did this post saying, don't raw dog it. Maybe pushing the envelope a little bit, but that really resonated with people. It really got their attention. And that post has gone somewhat viral, which is really cool. Also, people love a pun. People love wordplay. So again, this post here, utterly unpasteurized and utterly unsafe. This was another popular post. Now, you want to respond directly to questions. As I said before, canned or vague responses will not resonate with people. They're going to fall flat. So here in this recent post, we actually took, and we've been doing this more and more, we take questions and comments from our audience and we take the time to actually respond to them. Here, and actually, I guess I'll give the disclaimer. If you do health and science communication, you've probably received some pushback. At Unbiased Science, we get a lot of snarky comments. A lot of people saying, "Oh, unbiased science, more like biased science." And then on a much more serious note, we have unfortunately dealt with things like death threats and real threats to our safety. So just wanted to say that as well, that health and science communication can also come with its challenges. But one of the things that we found to be effective is listening to people and responding directly to their questions. So here in this post, people were asking, why do kids nowadays get more vaccines than back in the day, right? So we give an example. We're actually pulling a question that we received, and then we're walking through the timeline of vaccine progress, right? We're actually talking through, well, this is why we're getting more vaccines, because the science has advanced, because we've made progress in vaccine science. And so again, hearing people's questions and really responding in detail, rather than just dismissing their concerns. I'm not going to get into too much detail here. Like I said, this is something that we do quite a bit. Here's another question. Someone commented, well, the way we went from 5 shots by age 2 to 27 or more is insane. Disease has not increased. And so once again, just really walking through the timeline of vaccine development and scientific progress. And I will say the people who commented on this post, they then followed up with us and they thanked us for taking the time to really address their concerns and walk through the science. Now, here's something that I have to remind myself often as a science communicator. So, the mother who chooses not to vaccinate her child believes that she is making the right decision. Everyone is doing their best with the information that they have, right? And so, effective communication begins by meeting people where they are and not where we think they should be. So something that we've been doing that has been quite powerful for people is we give them a guide on what to say when you hear someone say, okay, vaccines cause autism, or, well, my friend's child was diagnosed with autism right after getting vaccinated. Isn't that proof? So something we found that's quite powerful is, yes, we're educating people directly, but another really cool thing that we could do is sort of arm them with talking points, with evidence, so that they could then bring that information back into their own communities, right? Because we are, as much as we like to fight it, we are all in our own little communities and echo chambers, and how wonderful it is to give people the skill set, the toolkit necessary where they could bring information back into their friend networks, their family, holiday meals, to the Facebook mom groups where they see misinformation swirling. So really, again, arming people with some talking points and evidence that they can lean on. Our impact extends beyond direct education. So this is exactly what I just said, right? So sometimes our greatest contribution is equipping others with the tools to engage their own communities. This is how we break through echo chambers and amplify science's reach, by empowering advocates within networks that we could never access alone. And something I didn't put on this slide is that sometimes we forget that the impact of our education, or of the information that we're deploying, it's not always immediate, right? So we're not necessarily going to change people's minds overnight. Sometimes we do, and that's fantastic. But other times it takes time, but we've planted seeds. These people, like I said, they're taking this information into their communities. There's often a ripple effect that we don't see. But this is just my little, and I often have to tell this to myself, don't give up. Just because you're not seeing the impact in real time or immediately does not mean that you're not having an impact. Here, I'm just giving a couple more examples. So here, we were giving a guide on, what to say when you hear someone say that hormonal birth control is dangerous, or that birth control causes depression and suicidal ideation. And I'll note that this post came out, it was actually quite timely. This was something that was picked up in the news, that birth control was harmful. There were a lot of myths and misconceptions. And The other thing I'd note is that we as scientists and health professionals, we're very good at being rigorous, right? We're dotting our I's, we're crossing our T's, which means that it often takes us a lot of time to put together this information in real time, right? Whereas the people who are putting out misinformation, they don't care about that rigor, right? And so they're doing so rapidly. And so my response to that, in addition to putting together these helpful guides, is to collaborate with people. I think we all really need to break out of our silos, lean into partnerships, form working groups, interdisciplinary working groups where we can really pool our expertise and respond in real time as rapidly as possible when misinformation about topics goes viral. I wanted to spend just a couple of minutes here talking about the different platforms that you can use if you are on social media or using social media as a tool. So there's TikTok, Instagram, and Facebook. These are three of the major platforms. If I had to use just a couple of words to describe, I always say TikTok is all about hook and intrigue. Instagram is where we can educate and explain, and Facebook is for deepen and really deep discussion, I should say. So Facebook is really where people appreciate more long form content in terms of demographics compared to the other two platforms. TikTok and Instagram tends to skew a little bit older in terms of audience, a bit more conservative. And so the preference, the content preference for this platform, people tend to like more detailed explanations. It's much less about graphics and much more about linking to long form content, for example. On Instagram, this is really where we lean into graphics. This is where Unbiased Science really shines. But in terms of demographics, tend to skew to millennials, right? So really that 25 to 40 demographic tend to be highly educated, a lot of parents of young children on there, and lots of health and wellness information. But this is really where you can put out those carousel infographics, very powerful data visualization. Myth first fact slides tend to be quite powerful on this platform. As opposed to
Dr. Steier, I just
yes,
want to give you a time check.
yes,
You have until about 11:05, including questions and answers.
yep.
So take
Thank
it.
you.
You're welcome.
I'll be done in about, I think, less than 5 minutes, and we'll open up to questions.
Wonderful.
Um, so TikTok is where I say, this is really where we see the goldfish effect. Here we're talking about Gen Z, younger demographics. This is where if you're trying to reach young people, this is a great opportunity to do so. But it's really challenging because people here, they tend to have a very short attention span. And in the first, you really only have 2 seconds to grab their attention, right? So we say you hook or lose in the first 2 seconds. It's video format. So again, it just depends on what what modality you're comfortable with in terms of communication approach. And the other thing I'd flag for TikTok, and this is true for really all the platforms, but if you are enjoying developing your content, that translates to people enjoying consuming your content. So I hear all the time that on TikTok in particular, authentic personalities, or that like if you're showing your real self, your true self, that tends to resonate more than a more polished or professional video style. The last thing I'll say, and I'm really only going to take 30 seconds to talk about this, I tend to get a lot of questions about AI. Obviously, this is a very, burgeoning field. I do think that AI is a great thing to have in our toolkit. There are pros and cons to it. So I never use it as a primary source or to find primary sources of of information or of data sources, research, literature, because it can often hallucinate. It could actually make up data and statistics. So it's not a great at this point in time, a great primary source of information. Although there are some really cool tools like Consensus, and no, this is not sponsored. I'm not affiliated with them in any way, but where they're really leaning into pulling specifically from peer-reviewed literature. So seems to be a lot of growth on that front. Where I do find it beneficial is in message framing. So if you have something that is more technical or maybe like long form content that you want to truncate or distill into key takeaways, it can be quite powerful for that purpose, or to tailor messages to different audiences. So, key takeaways, I would say, if I had to distill my whole presentation into a couple of key takeaways, it would be translate, don't simplify, right? So, you want to preserve scientific integrity while enhancing clarity. Design for diverse audiences. You want to tailor your information whenever possible, layer information for different levels of expertise. You have to embrace digital tools, right? In 2025, I think we need to come to accept that social media, the digital world, this is a great way for us to enhance, not replace human expertise and to deploy our messages. In terms of measurement or metrics, you really want to focus on behavior change, not just reach metrics. So I know when I do a social media post, it's great to see how many people like or share the post. But we have found that we've done some post surveys for some of our campaigns to really measure impact in terms of change with regard to knowledge, attitudes, beliefs, and behaviors. And just a very, very brief aside, we did a flu vaccine campaign. This was 2 years ago when our reach was actually half what it is today. And organically, in just 2 weeks, we reached over 1.3 million people. And we found that over 11,000 people changed their intention to get a flu vaccine specifically as a result of our campaign. Just to give you a real world example of the potential power of social media with regard to health information. Connection, not correction. You always want to lead with humanity and build trust before addressing misinformation. Interdisciplinary collaboration is key. You want to bring diverse expertise together. No man or no woman is an island. And we have to continuously evolve, right? Like this whole landscape is constantly evolving. And I think it could be easy for us to get set in our ways, but we have to adapt to the changing landscape. And I think I said this before, but I just wanted to close by saying science without humanity is just a textbook. When we bring joy to the creation process, our audience feels it in every word. The most compelling scientific stories are not just accurate, they are alive. So with that, I would say, thank you all for the work that you're doing on the front lines. It's a very interesting time to be in the health and science world. We definitely have a long fight ahead, but we are all in this together. So I'll stop there and happy to answer any questions that folks have.
Thank you, Dr. Steier. I started at the top of the chat and I'll just feed you the questions. Someone asked if you are saying, to clarify, if you are saying that the FDA was wrong to ban red dye 3 on January 16, 2025.
Oh gosh. I've done a whole post on this. I don't know that it's helpful to get super in the weeds here, but I'd say no, they're not wrong. This was triggered by legal action because there was a preclinical animal study, as I said, that did find that red dye could cause cancer. And so as a result, that triggered the removal of it from our foods. I don't think it's wrong, right? I don't think that removing it is going to have a real impact on our health, if I'm being honest. But I understand why they did it. Again, it was triggered by legal action. So that's my 2 cents about that. I don't think it's going to have a profound impact on public health.
All right, let's see if we have any other questions. If you have questions, please put them in the chat. But I saw at least one more.
There was a question or comment that built on that too.
Thanks,
And
Michael.
that the comment was just, wanting to know a little bit more, or the person's interested in hearing how petroleum-based dyes are good, if that's what you're saying.
Definitely not what I'm saying. I don't think that they're good, but I also don't think that there's a whole lot of evidence that they're bad. And so, yeah, that's I don't know if that's helpful. I understand why they're being removed, but I don't think that we're going to see any real tangible impact on public health.
Any other questions?
Hi, can I ask a question? It's
Absolutely.
easier just to say it versus trying to type it out.
Perfect.
Hi, thank you for this excellent presentation. I'm like just trying to soak it all up. I work in Carroll County, rural New Hampshire. And my question is, for those of us who are working in nonprofit settings, low budget, situations, we are not PR professionals. We are prevention workers, community workers, and so we typically have a limited amount of time and a few bucks, that we can throw at these, to try to put together some type of, social media presence. And I'm trying to figure out how to word exactly my question is, but what I'm after is I'm trying to get, the biggest bang for my buck. I'm trying to get the widest reach that I can, but I want to be really thoughtful about how I spend dollars on boosted posts or where I put posts or, how do we do this? I feel like we've tried to do some, nice looking posts, but then sometimes maybe we don't get a very far reach or the people, or maybe I'm trying to reach 20-year-olds, but I'm reaching the moms of 20-year-olds. So I'm like, because I'm not a professional at this, you know what I mean? So can you speak to a little bit to, how we can, as nonprofit, limited budget stuff, kind of get the biggest reach for our efforts?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, that's such a great question. I'm actually doing some work with NACHO, National Association of City and County Health Officials, to try to, in recognition of what you're describing, the limited resources, right? Limited bandwidth. And so what we're trying to do is develop some customizable graphics that local and state departments of health could use, and happy to follow up with you about that. I guess it really depends. With limited resources, I would try to focus on what are the biggest priority areas? What is your biggest, who really is your audience? Like, what, if you had to pick one or two or three priority areas, what would they be? And then let that dictate what you do, right? So if it's a campaign for older adults, I would probably focus more on that, like long form Facebook, sort of content, versus if it's young people or something about like HPV vaccines or whatever it might be. That's when I would really lean into these other platforms that are more likely to be viewed by younger people and also parents of younger people. But that being said, I mean, you're bringing up a major issue, one I wish I had better answers for. The other thing I'd say is that there are a lot, I mean, Unbiased Science, but there are so many other organizations and people doing science communication. And we would love to help in any way we can by, allowing folks to reuse our content, if that is helpful. Sorry, I feel like that's not the best response, but
No, it is helpful, and it's a little bit reassuring because, like, so now we'll follow your, podcast or your, social media platforms, because I do find like one efficient way that we try to use is use the resources that are available to us out there. Like New Futures is here today. They create some great stuff on advocacy, and we'll share out their stuff. Of course, the partnership, right, for Drug Free New Hampshire is creating content, and so we'll let them do it, and then we share it out on our
right.
channels, right? So we do try to kind of curate, very, reputable creators or organizations on suicide prevention, substance misuse prevention, that sort of thing, and then share out, because they've gone to all the trouble of, crafting and creating the graphics and, really
Right.
creating these quality content and share that out. But I appreciate your feedback.
Wonderful. Any more questions for Dr. Steier?
Hi, this is Lori Raridan. I'm with the state of New Hampshire our Division of Public Health Services, which I guess is our Department of Health, but we're not. We're a division within a much larger agency. So thank you so much for your presentation. That was all very helpful. And I just want to kind of follow up on on Catalina's comment that I think the other factor, in addition to limited money or resources, is time. And so I resonate with what you're saying is, you can make things available, and other organizations that are doing similar things can make things available that we can tailor to our needs. What I learn over and over as a science communicator who has had limited resources for over my career and not able to launch a giant marketing campaign, which is what would be ideal here, is that we just have to pool our resources and come together as a community to address a common need. And so as much as, we need to lean on our other state partners, our local partners, and here our team has been working on children's environmental health resources specifically for community health professionals in New Hampshire. So like community health workers and nurses who visit homes, and health officers, which are kind of unique in New Hampshire. But anyway, we're trying to meet people where they are and connect to that audience. And then they will go and take this information and connect to their clients and families that they speak to. So thank you for all the validation and support. And we'll just keep on keeping on, but I'll definitely, put all your information in my speed dial.
Thank you for the work that you're doing.
Thank you, Lori. Any other questions before I turn it over to the next speaker? All right, well, if you think of something, chat it and we'll try to get it answered. Thank you so much, Dr. Steier. That was really wonderful. You guys really teed up our next speaker perfectly. Christina Curell, who some of you know, is a JSI employee and a seasoned public health communicator. Some of her specialties are that she's developed campaigns or prevention campaigns or to change attitudes, stigma, and influence behavior around issues like vaping, smoking, opioid prevention in the US and abroad. So she has a wide range of experience, and her presentation, she's going to share lessons learned from her campaign development and execution, including how to refine your audience, your messages, and channels, and then how to engage partners for campaigns with impact. So with that, I would like to turn it over to Christina Curell.
Yeah, thanks, Karen. And thanks, Catalina and Lori. Like Karen said, that kind of teased me up really well because we're sort of going back to basics with this and talking about just some really practical stuff to think about no matter what your communications goals are. And for me in creating this, it's especially, I think, helpful if you're not a communication specialist or you wear many hats or you have limited resources to carry this stuff out, like the ways that you can still think in a strategic way about what your end goal is and how you can really have an impact. So on the next slide, just to say, so whether it's, that you are trying to increase your own social media presence and following. Oh, Emma, I think the whole slide maybe isn't in view. Maybe we just have to get rid of the side panel. Okay, thanks. Whether you're trying to build up your social media or you are actually launching like a targeted communications campaign, or you just want to use communications to promote, an upcoming event that you have or a project, a resource that you're providing, it can be really helpful to, we can go back one slide. Sorry. Really helpful to just think about the objectives, what we want to achieve with the communication, who's the really specific audience that's most important for you to reach, what are the messages, obviously, that are going to really resonate with them and feel relevant and get them from A to B, whether it's raising awareness or a gold standard of actually changing a health behavior. And then what are going to be the best channels for you to use, and related to the channels, who are some of the messengers that are trusted by your audience and that can help you get that message out. So to start on the next slide, first is just thinking about what is the objective, and maybe it is as simple as raising awareness about an event, a resource, something that's available, or about yourself. Maybe it's increasing people's involvement, community involvement in something that you're doing. It could be educating, changing beliefs, countering myths, as Jessica was going deeply into, changing people's attitudes or reducing stigma, which is often so ingrained in the topics that we're working on in prevention and SUD. It could be increasing support for policy or advocacy work, and ultimately also changing health behaviors. And I just want to acknowledge here that, communications can be a huge, important, impactful component of a public health approach to, you know, having influence on behavior and on health outcomes. But it doesn't happen in a vacuum, and it often is just one component of something that also includes, system change or increasing people's access to a resource, or, just a larger approach to making change. And I think the more that we can see the whole picture and understand how the communications works with those other components, the more impactful we can be. And then one last thing to just say about objectives is they really help us to think about our impact and how we're going to measure. If you know what you're actually trying to do and trying to achieve, then you can think about, what are our metrics? Are we actually going to get people to sign up for a service? Are we trying to increase the traffic to our website or email signups? Are we getting people to follow us on social media, or whatever it is, register for our event? Knowing and understanding what your objective is can help you to ultimately measure your impact and see if you are effective with your communication. So the next part I want to talk about is audience. On the next slide. So for any communication, again, whether it's promotion to increase people's awareness of you or of something you have coming up, or it's a targeted communications campaign, who is it most important that you reach? And I think sometimes our instinct, our initial reaction to this is like that it's everyone. But I would challenge you, for whatever your communications is for, to just try to get as specific as you can. Because even if there are a ton of people that you would like to reach, it's very likely that there are specific segments of a population within that broader group that are more important, either that are disproportionately impacted, or depending on what you know about them, they may be more likely to be able to change, and, would ultimately benefit more from receiving your messaging. So as specific as you can be will help in deciding which channels are going to be best, which messengers are going to be best, and how you craft your message for that specific person, because the same message isn't going to resonate for everybody, right? Okay, so on the next slide, just some examples of in the SUD space and prevention of audiences that you may be targeting with your communication. So whether it's community members, which is still pretty broad, so I'd say who specifically, but youth that are at risk of substance use, people who use drugs, and loved ones. It may be decision makers or community leaders, your community partners in the prevention space, maybe wider businesses, organizations, community centers, like brick and mortar places people are going. It could be healthcare providers, direct service, people who work in schools, professionals who work with youth or with the population you're trying to reach. Law enforcement, emergency medical technicians, pharmacists, just as some examples. So next slide. And then in terms of messages, the message is really important, obviously, in getting your audience from point A where they are now to what you want them to be, whether it's aware when they're not aware of you or what you're promoting, or making a change in their health behavior, or having a different attitude about a health issue. What's really important here is understanding where they are now. So what's their current level of knowledge, any misconceptions they have? Do they have negative attitudes or positive attitudes? In the example of vaping, which I do a lot of work in, like many youth have neutral or positive attitudes about vaping, and we may want to change that to be more negative. Whether it's their willingness to make a change, if we're talking about health behavior, someone who is not interested in quitting smoking or flossing their teeth ever is going to have a different message is going to resonate with that person in order to nudge them in the direction of change, compared to someone who has tried to quit smoking before and really wants to and is highly motivated, but it just, has relapsed or is having trouble keeping it up and staying quit. So their readiness to change, it may be about their access to resources to be able to make a change. It may be about their self-efficacy and, their belief that they have the power to make a change. So all of these considerations go into like how we can actually help someone make a shift from point A to point B. And I just want to quickly mention behavior change theory because it sort of operationalizes these different components of the psychology and the different things that can influence our health behaviors. So that can inform whether we're using like social modeling to try and model the behavior that we want to see in people, or whether or not we're trying to increase their self-efficacy and their belief that they can make a change, or if we're challenging really tough attitudes and stigma, or we're just focusing on like raising their awareness about resources that are available. But refining that message, deciding what that message is going to depend on research. Ideally, and again, this depends on funding and resource constraints, but whether it's doing a full-blown survey and focus groups and listening sessions, or whether it's reviewing literature to know what campaigns or communication has been done and has been effective with similar audiences, really seeking to understand as much as you can about the current context for your audience and like what are their barriers that are keeping them from making that change, or what are the possible opportunities where you could speak to them, or that would be new information that's really compelling. Understanding all that is a really important part of any formative research and message development, again, where you have the resources to do that. But there are, different levels of resources and input needed in order to gather some of that information. So on the next slide, communication channels. So this also is going to be impacted obviously by the resources that you have available. You're not going to do a big, TV ad buy spend for tens of thousands of dollars if you don't have that funding, but understanding who specifically you're trying to reach impacts the channels that you select. And some are free, some are cheap, some are more expensive, but things to think about are events, newspapers, magazines, local newspapers, websites. Obviously, you can do advertising through digital ads, through things like Google search, Google display ads. You can have social media ads, TV and streaming, radio, and similarly streaming audio on things like Pandora or Spotify. Billboards, outdoor signage, bus stop signage, print material distribution, direct mail. These are just some examples of ways to reach people, but again, just bringing it back to understanding who your audience is and where they get their information will help you make those decisions. And usually when you are doing targeted communications, you want a mix of these things because it's going to help you both reach different people who are getting their information in different places, and also try to ensure that people are interacting with it and seeing your message more than one time on these different platforms. And then along with channels, on the next slide, I just want to mention messengers, which I think, especially when in this work in prevention and SUD related work, when often the message is sensitive, the population may be vulnerable, having messengers that can help you get that out to your audience, who are people that the audience trusts and who has an understanding and has access to people, can be critically important in getting your message out. I'm thinking about an example of this from a campaign we were working on in Maine that sought to reduce opioid overdoses and did a lot of harm reduction work and had materials that were going to populations that weren't going to be reached on some of those more traditional channels that we would think about on social, for example. And so the print materials, the in-person, face-to-face interactions, the work that we did with community organizations who provide direct services was really important in order to reach and engage the people that were most important for our messaging. On the next slide, just to also say about messengers, yeah, examples would be like community organizations, direct service providers. And I also put online collaborators, which was something I think you mentioned, Catalina, about posting things and maybe not having a wide reach. Something to consider is posting things collaboratively, like on Instagram. I've done this with campaigns. For example, a campaign that was about vaping, but it was about the environmental impacts of vapes. So it was for youth. And we did posts collaboratively with organizations that do environmental advocacy specifically. So like they were not focused on vaping at all, but they were youth-led, youth-run, and focused on all things climate and environment. And since our topic touched on that, we created social media content together. And then on Instagram, you can post things where it's actually both accounts are posting and it shows up in their feed. So it's a way to get in front of all of their audience, even though, because it's going to be relevant to them, but it's not, it's like a borrowed audience. Answer your question about identifying those collaborators. I mean, I think it takes some research online. I think the more that if you have time to dedicate to organic, and Emma maybe want to speak to this too, but your organic activity online, you know, from your account, like engaging with other similar accounts, liking and commenting and sort of being in the spaces of the topical area that you're in online can help expose you to the other voices that are in that space. Some of it can be Googleable if you're trying to find like people that have influence on certain things, but there also are probably people, you know, on this call and in your professional network who are doing similar work, who may, you know, be willing to collaborate on sharing an event or something similar. So just to finish up, sorry, I got side reel, but I appreciate the question. Then, okay, so all of this is to say, what difference does it make? And ultimately, it's about the impact that your communications is having, right? So is what you're doing actually having the effect that you want it to? Are you reaching the right people? Is your message getting their attention? Does it resonate and feel relevant to them? Does your audience feel they can trust it? And this is ultimately, you know, a lot goes into that message development. But then also the channels that you're using, like, is it getting in front of the right people? Are you targeting the right people? And is it going to land with them and ultimately get at what you are trying to reach with your goals? And I think you just have a summary slide there of, again, thinking about objectives, audiences, channels, and messengers with your key messages. Thanks. My email's on the left slide in case people want to, I can put it in the chat too.
Christina, we have some questions. One is, how do we identify those collaborators who have a wide regional reach?
Yeah, so that I saw that as I was talking. That was when I was speaking to a little bit, and I think it does take some just intentional research about them. I don't know if Karen more about specific folks that whether or not you have access, to reach out to them, or is it really just identifying who they are?
I think you pretty much answered the question in your presentation. Sometimes it's tricky to find, especially and when we're working to reach that 18 to 24 population in our region. Our region is small. There's only a few thousand of them in our county. And so, it's kind of a micro community. And, it's easier to find kind of more statewide or national resources, but it's hard to figure out that formula of how to reach our more local region with the messaging that we're trying to do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But I hear what you said about trying to identify other organizations or companies or outfits that seem to be reaching that population, and then maybe reaching out, like you said, the example about the environmental group. Like I might not have thought of that because they're doing different work that we're doing, but it's not that. Your point is finding people who are reaching the population that you're trying to reach, and then kind of working together.
Yeah. And in that case, like we're talking about the same thing. It's young people, and I don't know if you're
Yeah.
talking about vaping specifically, but in that case, like it is really hard to do youth vaping prevention messaging online. And we have been doing a lot of research into that, and the messaging that can resonate and the visuals and all of this for the last year plus. And we're actually, I have to mention, about to launch a new campaign for New Hampshire youth for vaping prevention. But what we've done is gone wider and actually sort of pulled it back from being accounts specifically about vaping. It's about mental health and supporting health more broadly. And really, the background of it is trying to support those protective factors that can influence risky behaviors, including all substance use and other risky behaviors. So the campaign is going to be called More Good Mornings, and it's about, like acknowledging the tough times and that a lot of young people are struggling, but like offering different positive coping strategies and supporting things like, positive relationships and youth role models or adult role models, and building goal setting, and just sort of meeting kids where they are and offering support. And then we will slip in substance use and health and vaping information, but on its face, it's more just about mental health and supporting young people.
Yeah, I can't wait to see it. That's exactly the kind of stuff that we've been developing the last, 5 years. And so it's then we're always just trying to take it to that next level of not just creating a post that looks good or seems, colorful and friendly and messaging and all that, but then we put in all that time, and if only 20 people see it and only one person interacts with it, that's not really the best use of our resources. And we are not a PR firm. We're not, trained in this kind of stuff, but we're trying to just be creative and try to find a way to use what we have to reach the most people with the best message in, whatever way that we can.
Yeah, we have the same frustration, like I'm a communication specialist, and we see that like hard-hitting health messages related to vaping can resonate with youth, but in a social media environment, it's not the kind of thing that they're going to follow and like actively seek out and want to put in their feed. So we're trying to get really creative about how we actually reach more of them for that reason.
Wonderful. Thank you, Christina. We're going to bring up a few more slides. We just have a few more updates. And just a reminder that the evaluation link is in the chat, and we really do appreciate your feedback. And, kind of one thing I was thinking is if there's any tools that might be helpful to you, maybe putting that in the evaluation, just in case we happen to have something, or we could work together. So here are the updates. The NDAFW, the National Drug and Alcohol Facts Week social media toolkit is up and on our website. The goal of this toolkit is really to foster a dialogue on the science, right, of substance use and substance use disorder among youth with this toolkit, and that we have customizable messages and graphics to share about substance use. And we ask just that you tag us if you post anything from the toolkit. Next slide. We have a new blog up. It's called Building Belonging, How Connection Helps Prevent Youth Substance Use. I recommend you give it a read. It's really wonderful. Next slide. We have a podcast that was just published with Bobby Bagley, public health hero of mine. And she talks about inspirational stories on substance misuse prevention, culturally appropriate and equitable prevention. And coming up, we have Choose Love, teaching young people vital skills for getting along in the world with Shannon Desilets. Any questions or comments? We still have a few minutes, but if you think of it afterwards, please reach out to the partnership or to Julie, and we will get that answered. Are there any final questions? Thank you, Rebecca. Thank you guys all for coming. This was really enjoyable for me. High educational.